The smell of old grease and stale coffee is usually a comfort to me, a reminder of a lifetime spent fixing things that were broken. But today, sitting in the waiting room of Sal's auto body, the scent made my stomach turn. I sat on a cracked vinyl chair that wheezed every time I shifted my weight, my hands clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee so tightly that my knuckles had turned the color of parchment. I am Thomas Rourke. I am 75 years old, a retired electrical engineer who spent 40 years designing fail-safes for power grids. My entire career was built on the premise that if you look closely enough, you can prevent a disaster before the first spark flies. But as I stared through the smudged glass partition at my 1968 Shelby Mustang hoisted high on the hydraulic lift, I realized that I had been looking in the wrong direction for a very long time. That car is my pride and joy. It is a beast of American steel and chrome that I bought the day I secured my first senior engineer position. I restored it bolt by bolt with my late wife Martha in the evenings after work. We sanded the rust, rebuilt the carburetor, and stitched the leather seats together. It was supposed to be a legacy. It was the inheritance I intended to hand over to my son Jason on his next birthday. Jason? My son has been living in the guest room for the past year. He came to me with his head low and his pockets empty, telling me a complicated story about bad market investments and a layoff in the finance sector. He needed a place to reset, he said. I welcomed him. I am a father. That is what we do. I cooked him pot roast. I loaned him $20,000 to float him until his next bonus, money I knew in my gut I would never see again. But lately, the air in the house has changed. It has grown heavy. He asks too many questions about the probate process. Last night, he offered to tune up the Mustang for my weekend drive to the coast. "Let me help you, Dad," he'd said, smiling that charming smile that used to get him out of trouble in high school. "You're getting too old to crawl under the chassis. Let me grease the fittings and check the lines." I was touched. I actually teared up. I thought, finally, he is showing gratitude. I thought he was trying to pay me back with labor since he couldn't pay me back with cash. But this morning, as I backed out of the driveway, the brake pedal felt soft, spongy. There was no resistance. Instinct, honed by 50 years of engineering and an intimacy with machines, screamed at me to stop. I threw it into park, turned off the ignition, and had it towed to Sal immediately. Now, the door to the garage bay opened. Sal walked into the waiting room. He has been my mechanic for 30 years, a man who usually greets me with a joke and a rag to wipe his hands. Today, his hands were clean. He wasn't smiling. He was holding a small, clear plastic bag containing a section of black rubber tubing. His face was pale, the kind of pallor you see on a man who has witnessed a wreck. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Thomas," he said, his voice low and devoid of its usual warmth, "we need to talk, privately." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stood up, leaving the coffee on the table, and followed him. He closed the door to his cluttered office and locked it. The click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot in the small room. Sal walked behind his desk and placed the plastic bag on the blotter. He looked at it for a long moment before looking at me. "You said the brakes felt soft," Sal started, his voice trembling slightly. "You said the pedal went to the floor. I put it up on the lift to check the master cylinder, thinking maybe a seal blew." He picked up the bag. He held it up to the fluorescent light. "This isn't wear and tear, Tom." I stepped closer. I put my reading glasses on. The tubing inside the bag hadn't burst. It hadn't frayed. It was severed. "Sir," Sal whispered, dropping the formality because the horror of the situation demanded intimacy. "Someone cut the wires and the brake line, and it wasn't a rat." The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. "Show me," I said. My voice sounded foreign, mechanical. Sal pointed to the end of the tubing. Look at the angle. It's a clean diagonal slice. A rat chews. A rock tears. This is a pinch cut. Someone took a pair of side cutters, applied pressure, and snapped it. But they didn't cut it all the way through, Tom. They nipped it. Just enough so that it would hold pressure in the driveway. But the moment you hit 50 miles an hour and slammed on the brakes for a curve, I stared at the black rubber. As an engineer, I appreciate precision. I understand the physics of failure. This was a delayed action sabotage. It was designed to fail on the winding coastal highway I drive every Sunday morning. It was designed to send a 3,000-pound car through a guardrail and into the Pacific Ocean. I asked, though the bile rising in my throat told me I already knew the answer. I'm sure, I said. I found the tool marks on the remaining metal crimp. He paused, reaching into his pocket. And Tom, I found this, wedged in the undercarriage, caught between the sway bar and the frame. Whoever was down there. He opened his hand. In his grease-stained palm lay a button. It was a distinct, heavy brass button, embossed with a small anchor. It came from a high-end designer jacket, a jacket that cost $600. I recognized it instantly. I felt the breath leave my lungs as if I had been punched in the solar plexus. It fell off Jason's favorite jacket, the one I bought him for Christmas. The realization hit me with the force of a head-on collision. My son didn't tune the car. He sabotaged it. He crawled under the chassis of the car I built, the car I was going to give him, and he rigged a death trap for his own father. I closed my eyes, and the numbers flashed in my mind. The life insurance policy, double indemnity for accidental death, $2 million if I die in a car crash, $1 million if I die in bed. He did the math. He calculated the return on investment, and he decided that my life was worth the risk of a pair of wire cutters. I sat down in the chair opposite Sal's desk, staring at that brass button. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with the death of the love I held for my child. I spent my life building safety systems. I spent 40 years protecting people I didn't even know from power surges and electrical fires. I built walls of logic and copper to keep the world safe. But I never once imagined that the danger was sleeping down the hall. If you are listening to this, if you have children who look at your bank account more than your face, if you feel like a burden instead of a father in your own home, don't ignore that feeling. Don't make the mistake I did. Don't wait until you are staring at a piece of cut rubber to realize the truth. Subscribe to this channel. Listen to my story, because I am going to show you how to survive the people who are supposed to love you. I'm calling the police, Sal said, reaching for the receiver on his desk. This is attempted murder, Tom. No, I said. My hand shot out and clamped over his wrist. My grip was surprisingly strong. Sal looked at me, shocked. Tom, he tried to kill you. If you had driven that car. I know, I said. My voice was steady. It was terrified, yes, but underneath the terror was a fury so cold it burned. But not yet. If we call them now, what happens? He'll claim it was an accident. He'll say he was trying to fix the line and nicked it by mistake. He'll say the button fell off when he was checking the oil. He's charming, Sal. He's a finance guy. He talks his way out of everything. The police will see an old man and a clumsy son. Sal asked, his voice desperate. You can't go back there. I want to catch him, I said. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. I want proof that no lawyer can spin. And more than that, I want proof that no lawyer can spin.
And more than that, I want to watch him look me in the eye when he thinks I'm dead. It's not a game, I said. It's engineering. He created a fault in the system. I made Sal promise to fix the car but leave it at the shop overnight. I told him to lock the evidence, the tubing and the button in his safe. Then I walked out of the garage and hailed a taxi. The ride home was a blur of gray streets and gray thoughts. I remembered teaching Jason to ride a bike. I remembered holding him when he scraped his knee. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated. Every memory was now tainted, poisoned by the image of him sliding under my car with a pair of cutters in his hand.
When the taxi pulled up to the house I paid off 30 years ago, the house he was currently living in for free, I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't walking into a home anymore. I was walking into a crime scene where the victim was still walking around. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled of roasted chicken. He was cooking. He was playing the part of the dutiful son while waiting for the phone call from the police telling him I had driven off a cliff. I walked into the kitchen. Jason was standing at the counter making a sandwich. He froze when he saw me. For a split second, his mask slipped. His eyes went wide, darting to the clock on the microwave. It was 11 a.m. I should have been on the highway by now. I should have been dead by now. He asked. His voice cracked slightly. I thought you were driving to the coast. Did you leave already? I looked at him. I looked at the hands spreading mayonnaise on bread, wondering if those same hands had shaken when they cut my brake line. Car trouble, I lied, keeping my face blank. I hung up my coat slowly, buying time to control the tremor in my voice. Oh, he said. He put the knife down. He tried to look concerned, crinkling his brow, but I saw the flash of panic in his eyes. He was calculating. He was wondering if the mechanic had seen the cut. Sal is looking at it, I said, walking to the fridge to get a glass of water. I turned my back to him, watching his reflection in the window above the sink. He said it looks like a rat chewed through something. I watched the reflection. Jason exhaled. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension left his body. He smiled. It was a small smile, fleeting and cold, but it chilled my blood more than the winter air ever could. He believed the lie. He thought he was safe. He thought it was just a failed attempt, an inconvenience, not a discovery. Damn rats, he said, shaking his head. They're a nuisance. Well, I'm just glad you're safe, Dad. I turned around and looked at my son. I looked at the boy I taught to walk, the man I trusted with my legacy, and I realized I was looking at a stranger who wanted to bury me for a payout. I'm safe, I said, taking a sip of water and staring him dead in the eye. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a house when you know the person sleeping down the hall wants you dead. It is heavy and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm, charged with an invisible electricity that makes the hair on your arm stand up. For the next 48 hours, I lived in that silence. I lived in a house with my assassin. I sat across from Jason at the breakfast table, watching him pour milk into his cereal, wondering if today was the day he would decide the car was taking too long. I ate the dinner he cooked, a pasta dish he claimed was his specialty, and chewed every bite with suspicion, wondering if the seasoning was arsenic or just oregano. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a house when you know the person sleeping down the hall wants you dead. It is heavy and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm, charged with an invisible electricity that makes the hair on your arm stand up. For the next 48 hours, I lived in that silence. I lived in a house with my assassin. I sat across from Jason at the breakfast table, watching him pour milk into his cereal, wondering if today was the day he would decide the car was taking too long. I ate the dinner he cooked, a pasta dish he claimed was his specialty, and chewed every bite with suspicion, wondering if the seasoning was arsenic or just oregano. I slept with my bedroom door locked and a heavy oak chair wedged firmly under the handle, lying awake until the sun came up, listening for the creak of floorboards. But I wasn't just hiding, I was planning. I am an engineer. When a system fails, you don't just patch it, you monitor it, you gather data, you isolate the fault. I enlisted Sal's help. He was more than a mechanic. He was the only man on earth who knew the truth about the monster living in my guest room. While Jason was sweating out his toxins, Sal and I were sweating in the garage. We didn't just fix the brake line, we rigged the stage. We installed 3 high-definition pinhole cameras, the kind you can buy online for $50, but provide 4K clarity. We mounted one over the workbench, concealed in a box of old spark plugs. We aimed one directly at the Mustang's undercarriage from a low shelf, and we placed the third one in the corner, capturing the entire bay. Sal asked me as we adjusted the angles, wiping dust from the tiny lens. Watching it happen. "My heart is already broken, Sal," I said, checking the feed on my tablet. Then I set the bait. At dinner on Thursday night, I put on the performance of a lifetime. I sighed heavily, pushing my peas around the plate, looking every bit the tired, defeated old man Jason believed me to be. "Jason," I said, my voice wavering just enough. Jason's head snapped up. He stopped chewing. "Oh?" "He said the car is fixed," I lied. "He checked the lines. He thinks it was just an old, brittle rubber hose that finally gave way. He said sometimes they crack internally where you can't see them." I watched my son's face. I watched for the relief or the suspicion. Instead, I saw a light turn on behind his eyes. It was hope. Malicious, greedy hope. "That's great news, Dad," he said, leaning forward. "That's really great." "I think so," I said, rubbing my forehead. "But I have to admit, I'm a little nervous. After the scare in the driveway, maybe I shouldn't be driving that beast anymore." Jason insisted. The desperation in his voice was sharp. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It took everything in me not to recoil. "Dad, you love that car. It keeps you young. You've been talking about this drive for weeks." "It's a long drive," I murmured. "The coastal highway is winding." "Nothing will go wrong," he promised. "Sal fixed it, right? You should go. Take the scenic route. You know, the one that goes up along the cliffs." He was pushing me toward the cliff edge. He was practically drawing the map to my grave. "You're right," I said, forcing a weak smile. The next morning, Friday, Sal dropped off the Mustang. It gleamed in the driveway, its candy apple red paint reflecting the sun, unaware that it was meant to be a coffin. Sal handed me the keys, gave me a grim nod, and left without a word. As soon as Sal's truck disappeared down the street, I went inside. "I'm going to take a nap, Jason," I called out. "Good idea, Dad," he yelled back from the living room. I went into my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet. I waited. 10 minutes later, the garage door opened. Jason walked into the bay. He looked different when he thought he was alone. His posture was sharper, his face harder. He looked around nervously, checking the windows. He went to the side door and locked it. Then he walked over to the Mustang. He ran his hand along the fender, almost affectionately. He grabbed the toolbox, my toolbox, the one I had given him when he bought his first junker car in high school. He pulled out the creeper and slid under the chassis. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I watched the screen, zooming in on the feed from the low shelf. He wasn't stopping at the brake lines this time. He was smart enough to know that Sal might have installed new, tougher lines. He was double-checking his work, or maybe ensuring the fix Sal did wouldn't hold. I hit record. I watched my son reach up into the guts of the machine. The camera caught the glint of the wire cutters in his hand. He hesitated for a second, then bypassed the brakes. He reached higher. He severed the steering fluid line. It was a backup plan, a fail-safe. If the brakes didn't fail, the steering would lock up. On the hairpin turns of the Pacific Coast Highway, a loss of power steering at 60 miles an hour was a death sentence. He slid out from under the car. He stood up, wiping his prints off the tools with a rag. He put everything back exactly where he found it. Then he stood in front of the car, hands on his hips. He looked at the grill, and the camera's microphone picked up his whisper, clear as a bell. I turned off the tablet. I sat in the silence of my room, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying because I was scared. I was crying because I was grieving. My son had died in that garage. The man walking around my kitchen was just a shell filled with greed. I had him. Saturday morning arrived. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, the kind of day that begs for a drive with the windows down. It was perfect for a tragedy. I dressed in my driving jacket. I packed a small bag. I walked into the kitchen with my keys jingling in my hand. Jason was drinking coffee at the counter. He looked expectant, almost giddy. He had probably already spent the insurance money in his head. "Is it?" he asked, putting down his mug. "Yes," I said. "Drive safe," he said. "Actually," I said, stopping in the middle of the room, "I was thinking—" Jason froze. The mug paused halfway to his mouth. "Come with me?" I repeated, keeping my voice casual. "It's been years since we went for a drive together. Just you and me. You can drive." That was the dagger. "You love that car," I said, stepping closer. "You've always wanted to take it out on the highway. I'm feeling a little tired this morning." "My eyes aren't what they used to be. You take the wheel." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a shade was pulled down. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. "Dad, I have plans," I asked. "What plans? You don't have a job, Jason. You don't have anywhere to be." "I can't," he stammered. "Nonsense," I said. I reached out and held the keys toward him. They dangled in the air, glittering metal temptations. "It's a beautiful day. I want to spend time with my son. I want you to experience the power of that engine on the cliffs." I let the word hang there. I hardened my gaze. He looked at me. He looked at the keys. He looked at the door to the garage. He knew. In that split second, the mask slipped completely. The charm vanished, replaced by the cornered, frantic look of a trapped animal. He knew that getting in that car meant death. He knew exactly what was waiting for the driver at the first sharp turn. "I'm not getting in that car," he snapped. His voice rising. I asked, my voice dropping to a low rumble. "Is it the brakes?" He stepped back, knocking his hip against the counter. "I think you do," I said, taking a step forward. "I think you know exactly what would happen if that car hit 60 miles an hour on the coastal road, because you made sure of it." "You're crazy," he stammered, backing toward the hallway. "You're senile. You're imagining things. I'm leaving." "And you're on camera," I said calmly. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The video from yesterday played. Jason sliding under the car, the flash of the wire cutters, the whisper. "Goodbye, old man." The sound of his own voice filled the kitchen. Jason stared at the screen. His face twisted into something ugly, something violent. He realized the game was over. He realized the money was gone. He lunged for me, yelled, reaching for the phone. But the front door opened behind him. Sal walked in, looking grim and heavy. Behind him were two uniformed police officers and a detective in a suit. I hadn't just called Sal. I had called the detective Sal knew from his years of dealing with stolen parts. They had seen the footage an hour ago. Jason froze mid-lunge. He looked at the police, then back at me. "Jason Rauch," the officer said, stepping forward with handcuffs already drawn. Jason didn't fight. He didn't run. He just collapsed. He sank to his knees on the kitchen floor, weeping. But they weren't tears of remorse. They weren't tears of sorrow for trying to kill his father. They were the tears of a narcissist who had lost the game. He looked up at me as the officer pulled his arms behind his back and clicked the cuffs shut. His face was wet, red, and pathetic. "I needed the money, Dad," he sobbed. "I just needed a reset. You have so much, you just sit on it." The words hit me harder than the wire cutters. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a bank vault that was taking too long to open. I was using it to live, I said softly. They dragged him out. He was screaming now, begging me to tell them it was a mistake, begging me to call his lawyer, begging for the dad who used to fix everything. I stood in the kitchen and said nothing. The house fell silent. The smell of his coffee still hung in the air. I walked to the window and watched the squad car drive away, my son's head bowed in the back seat. Sal walked over and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Doe?" he asked gently. "No," I said, staring at the empty street. "I'm not." I walked out to the garage. The Mustang sat there, beautiful and deadly. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the hood. I had loved this car. It represented my youth, my success, my marriage. Now it represented the day my son decided I was worth more dead than alive. I would never drive it again. I sold the car the next week. I couldn't bear to look at it. I used the money, every cent of it, to start a legal defense fund for elderly victims of financial abuse. I lost my son, but I kept my life. And as I sit here now, alone in a quiet house, safe but scarred, I know that the wires he cut were the last connection I had to him. He tried to sever my lifeline, but in the end, I was the one who severed the rest. I am Thomas Rourke, and I survived the person who was supposed to love me.